Good morning. My name is Stephen Triplett, and I am a director in client partnerships at ACT in Iowa City, Iowa. And our focus this morning is on the challenge of filling the STEM pipeline. And we appreciate you joining us. A little bit about myself. I've been with ACT for almost 5 years. I'm a former K-12 educator, and I have the honor of representing ACT on the Iowa STEM Council. So I want to talk a little bit about ACT this morning, and just a quick refresher. ACT is a not-for-profit organization headquartered in Iowa City, Iowa. The mission of ACT is helping people achieve education and workplace success. That is a very important mission for us. And the great thing about it is we lead with research. We are going to share this morning some of the great work done by our research team, specifically 3 to 4 reports that we now have available. So our objectives, rationale for the ACT Condition of STEM report. We want to look at why we decided to put it together. One is a great number of students of graduates who take the ACT. 2, ACT assesses science, which makes us unique in being able to provide feedback on that. 3, interest inventory. Students taking the ACT are involved with taking the interest inventory, and that gives us feedback on their interest in majors and occupation. And 4, our deep commitment to the STEM initiative. We think it's very important for our nation to have students prepared and ready to tackle STEM majors and occupations. We're going to look at identification of key trends and gaps. We're going to see where the achievement levels are highest in what STEM areas and where there might be gaps that we need to address. The Condition of STEM report has spawned 2 other reports that we think are very important, and we're going to share information on those today. They are the Condition of Future Educators and the Understanding the Underserved Learner reports. Both of these reports have been well received across the country, and we're going to share some key points from them. And finally, we will take some time for the introduction of the ACT STEM benchmark, which is a key point moving forward as students look to see if they are prepared for STEM majors and occupations. I just wanted to hit on the next slide for, excuse me, just a minute to take a look at the wide variety of state partnerships in college and career readiness that ACT has across the country. Those states that in the dark blue certainly represent relationships with ACT. And I want to bring your attention to the bullets in the lower left-hand corner. These are key points of what the statewide assessments offer students. And the first bullet in particular is of great interest to me: increasing opportunities for minority and middle to low-income students. We certainly have a focus on that group of students at ACT, and we actually even have an underserved group, a leadership group here at ACT. So I want to take a quick snapshot of the ACT Condition of College and Career Readiness. And if you look at the information on the left side of the screen, you'll note that it says 59% of the graduates of the 2015 graduates took the ACT last year, and that number is ever increasing. So we're very proud of that, and that gives us a substantial amount of data on which to base our reports. Of those 59%, 86% of those kids had post-secondary aspirations, which is a fantastic statistic. But if you note right below them, there are some red flags that come up, some areas of concern. Because of that group of students who took the ACT, 31% of those students met no benchmarks. So that means there is a gap between preparation and aspirations, and something we need to address. In the middle of the screen, you'll notice there are 4 numbers across the emblem there, and we want to focus on science and math. Those are the percentages of students who met the college readiness benchmark in that particular area. So if you notice, 42% met the math benchmark, and we're going to discuss these later, and 38% met the science benchmark. So you will see as we move through the report the impact that students having an interest in STEM have on those two percentages. Then farther down, you'll notice what is readiness? How does ACT measure college readiness? And so a student meeting those benchmarks would seem to have a 50% chance of getting a B or better in the typical first-year class in that area, or a 75% chance or better of getting a C in that college entrance class. And then if you notice on the right, again, just our total impact across the country, 12 million plus are the total ACT assessments of all our range of assessments taken in 2015 across the K-career continuum. So let's look at those college readiness benchmarks. And they've been long established, and ACT has been well known for having these available for students. The ACT college scoring is 1 to 36. So these benchmarks are set that in English 18, Mathematics 22, Reading 22, and Science 23, that we're saying in those typical first-year courses for first-year students, they have that 50% chance of getting a B and 75% chance of getting a C. What we're really talking now, and a lot of our focus this morning, are these the typical courses for STEM majors? And is college ready the same as STEM ready? So ACT has really had to dig deep to ask ourselves these questions and do the research behind it to determine if there needs to be a different benchmark for those students interested in STEM. And I guess our concern is that so many students aspire to be STEM majors, but so few actually graduate with a STEM degree. And we want to help those students better understand what it means to be ready for a STEM major. Okay. So just to further clarify, when we talk about national attainment in college and career readiness, over 1.9 million kids took the ACT of the graduates in 2015. That's 59% of the graduating class. And that's increased greatly from 2011 to 15. That's up 18.6%. So that is a great number of students that we can draw that data from. And if you notice to the right there on the graph, I have circled the benchmarks again in math and science, 42% and 38%, because those are critical to our future further conversations this morning. So if we look at another important aspect from the ACT perspective, is we talk about students being well prepared and taking a rigorous course of study while they're in high school to better prepare them for those entry-level college courses. And what we have here is a comparison of students who took the core, so that core curriculum, 4 years of English and 3 years each of math, social studies, and science, and comparison with kids who did not complete the core curriculum. So if you look again, as we focus this morning on math and science, kids who took the core, 45% met the benchmark attainment in math and 42% in science. And if you look at lesson core, look at the huge differential there between those students taking the core curriculum and those not, 45 to 8%. So that is just a huge impact for students if they do not take a core curriculum in high school. So that brings us to the Condition of STEM 2015 report, and we're going to share some of the major findings within the report. But I want to share with you, this is you can see the cover from our national report, but state reports are available. And each fall, we released this year on November 10th, our account managers go out and share this report at both the national and state level, and they share with educational workforce leaders in every state. So we do our best to get this information out to each and every state on a yearly basis. But on our website, after the presentation, you can understand that you can go up and access both the national and state reports. So what does the ACT Condition of STEM report really do? Well, first, it refines a grouping of STEM majors and occupations. When we started the report in 2013, One of the things that was of great concern to us is that from 2011 to 13, only 11% of the ACT graduates who had taken the ACT met the National Science Foundation definition for STEM. And you know, employers and STEM leaders were going, we want to know more about other majors and occupations. So we defined and refined the grouping of STEM majors and occupations. It documents science and math subject aptitudes. So it does that through the benchmark attainment. And again, that's a real asset for ACT in that we do assess science. It identifies both expressed and measured interest in STEM through our interest inventory. And what we did in the interest inventory, there were 294 majors and occupations available to us in the interest inventory. A team at ACT determined that 93 of those met that STEM criteria as an area of interest. And we looked at it that way to determine what expressed and measured interests are. And I want to share a little bit about expressed and measured interest right now. So if a student has just expressed interest, that's a student who has chosen one of those 93 areas as a point of interest. So on the interest inventory, they might say, I'm interested in engineering. So that would be, put them in that expressed category. Measured interests, that would be that they have completed the interest inventory, and it points them towards their interest peaks in the science and technology scales. So if a student has expressed, they may not be measured, so they can be either expressed, measured, or expressed and measured. And that's a student who expresses an interest in a STEM major or occupation, then completes the interest inventory, and it points him in that direction as well. Okay? I guess our concern always is the disconnect for students that either are expressed only or measured only, because a student who's expressed only and says, I would like to be an engineer, but their interest inventory points them a different direction, there may be a disconnect there, an awareness of what that major or occupation really entails. A measured interest is a student who takes it and it points them in that science and technology scale, but is looking at a different major occupation. There may be a disconnect there with an understanding of, have I taken the right classes? Do I really know what that position would be? So our goal always, and I want to go back, and just to let you know on the percentages. So measured only is about 18%. Expressed only is about 48%. And then expressed and measured is about 34% of those kids who have some interest in STEM. But our goal is that we want to help STEM councils, businesses, industry leaders, educational leaders with setting academic and employment goals. So that's why we really work to provide the best information possible. So the STEM major categories that our research teams came up with are these four: science, computer science and math, medical and health, and engineering and technology. And before I go any farther, I would like you to take a look at these four and kind of guess in your own mind which of these you think will be the largest category, okay? So what we have here is science, the traditional hard sciences, which involve management of natural resources and science education. And that is 22% of those kids that were interested in STEM fall into that category. And that has remained very steady in our trends over the past few years. Computer science and mathematics, including mathematics education, is at 11%, which is a slight gain over the last couple of years. But we will be honest with you, we thought that would be higher when we first started the report in 2013. Medical and health, which includes the health sciences and medical technologies, is by far our largest grouping, 42%, although it's trending slightly down over the last year. But it's interesting in medical health and health, it has the lowest benchmark attainment, Okay, there's quite a gap between the other three and medical and health, but it also has the biggest gender gap. Males outperform females by a large margin in the medical and health area. And then engineering and technology. Engineering technology is trending up as far as the percentage of students interested, so that's a really good thing. It's no surprise that it has the highest percentage of benchmark attainment. And the other unique thing about this is across the board, females outperform males in benchmark attainment in this area of engineering and technology. So that is the good news. The bad news is those students interested in this area, males still outnumber females 5 to 1. So that's a concern there. So let's go talk a little bit more about those categories and what you would find available in the report. And as you can tell, the report must have a great deal of data, because when we first started to put the STEM condition report together, we visited with the Midwest STEM Forum. We made a presentation there and said, here's what ACT is thinking. This is the data we have. What kind of feedback could you provide us? And the leaders there gave us a great deal of feedback and said that information's really good, but we want more information. So if you look in our report today, you'll see that our data subsets include proximity to benchmark, number of benchmarks met, race, ethnicity, gender, educational aspiration, as well as parents' level of education. So you get a great breakdown of where students are as far as preparation for those majors. Also, for each classification for the 4 areas, we provide tables to show the number of students interested in each major or occupation within the category. Now, for states where 100% or nearly 100% of the students take the ACT, that data is so valuable to a state because they can determine exactly where the interest levels are or interest areas are in each major occupation and the actual numbers of students looking at that major. And I'm going to show you an example of that right now. And this is actually from the National STEM Report, and this is computer science and math, which is a little smaller group or a smaller group of majors and occupations. But this actually tells you of the N counts for overall STEM interest, how many kids are looking at that particular major occupation, and expressed and measured only. And again, expressed and measured only we're going to focus on a lot this morning because that's a group of kids that tend to persevere and would score the highest and have the highest benchmark attainment. So let's take a look and let's go back and remember that 42 and 38 of all the students who took the ACT in 2015, the graduates, the benchmark attainment percentages were 42% for math and 38% for science. But let's look at it if a student has any STEM interest at all, what happens to those percentages? And you can see that in math it goes from 42 to 49, and in science it goes from 42 to 45. Okay, so you have a slight gain if they have some STEM interest. Well, what happens if they have expressed and measured interest? Okay, that 42 and 38 transpires to 58 and 54. So there's almost a 16% differential in benchmark attainment from all students who take the ACT to those students who have an expressed and measured interest in STEM. So these students certainly are have proven to be higher achieving at that time if they have an interest in STEM. So what have we learned over time? Interest in STEM remains high. In fact, it's been a very consistently around 49%. Okay, it has stayed that surprised us the first year. To be very honest with you, we thought it was going to be around 35% that first year, and it came out to be about 49% and has remained very close to that at all since then. Achievement levels are highest when STEM interest is both expressed and measured, and we've already shown you that there is a huge jump in benchmark attainment when students have both an expressed and measured interest in STEM. Female interest in STEM is high. This was another surprise to us a little bit the first time that we put our report together. In fact, there are slightly more females than males that have an interest in STEM. And then lastly, interest in teaching STEM subject areas is very low. And we're going to talk about that and take a closer look at that coming up here. So STEM teacher shortage concerns. And again, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of self-reflection here and think a little bit. So we've talked about more than 1.9 million graduates took the ACT test in 2015. I want you to think a little bit ahead of time. How many of those students do you think had both an expressed and measured interest in science education or math education? Now, we realize the numbers I'm going to show you are low. There are many, many more students involved in education programs across the country than what we're going to show you here. But it certainly is a wake-up call to the definite potential shortage of excellent math and science teachers in the future. So of the more than 1.9 million graduates who took the ACT test in 2015, only 606 had an expressed and measured interest in teaching science. That's really a scary statistic. And it gets worse in math. Only 525 had an expressed and measured interest in teaching math. And even though our number of graduates who took the ACT went up in 2015, these numbers actually declined. So this is something, certainly an area of concern from ACT's perspective. So what that led to was in 2014, we provided our first in-depth look at interest in the educational fields in the Condition of Future Educators report. So this report is also available to you on our website and really takes a broader look at student interest in educational careers. Another area that is of interest to us is our underserved population. And these statistics are from our condition report that comes out every August. And it shows you the ethnicity gap that we have in benchmark attainment. You know, we certainly would love to see those achievement gaps closed, but it's been a concern, and I'm a former educator, and this was always an area of concern for us. But this graph kind of shows the ethnicity gaps that we face across the country. So to further research, we did extensive work and expanded that to try to put together a report that would enhance that information from a STEM perspective. So we took a look at understanding the underserved learner from a STEM perspective in our report in the Condition of STEM 2014. So this is another report that just came out for the first time last year, and we are just starting planning for both of these, the Future Educator report and the Understanding Underserved Learner report that will be coming out later this year. So within this report, we had to define underserved, and it had what we determined there were three characteristics that we were going to look at, and again there are several definitions out there of underserved, but for ACT's report we looked at minority, low income, and first generation in college, and as long as the student had one of those characteristics, we consider them underserved. So what did we find out? Although the numbers were high of student interest within the underserved group, they exhibited lower ACT benchmark attainment rates. And I guess that was not a surprise to us when you focus on the underserved group. But one of the key things that stood out to me on that report, if you looked at the three characteristics to define underserved students, and if you looked if a student had one of those characteristics compared to two or more, the students appear to have a cumulative depressing effect on college readiness if they have two or more of those characteristics. And so the greater number, the lower the benchmark attainment rates. and I have a graph here that I want to just point out a quick example of that. If you look to the second to last column under science, and you look at low income only, which is the second number down, the benchmark attainment rate was 37% for that group of kids. But if you look at the bottom of that column and look at students who were both low income and minority, the benchmark attainment percentage was 14. So just a huge gap impacted by whether a student had one or they had more than one of those characteristics. So we're going to move forward a little bit, and ACT is known that they continue to look for other points of interest and where they could go from there. So a group of researchers at ACT started looking at STEM readiness, persistence, graduation rates. And the information is pretty clear. Many students aspire to be STEM majors, but many students who also aspire are not academically prepared. And again, remember that nearly 50% of the kids who took the ACT in 2015 of those graduates had an interest in a STEM major or occupation. So that's huge. So what does this mean? So the pre-college performance gap, STEM versus non-STEM. So there's a gap with the performance, as we've already demonstrated, the higher benchmark attainments in math and science. Also, STEM majors enter college with higher average test scores and higher high school GPAs, and the gaps tend to increase over time, although there's higher attrition in the STEM fields. And it's certainly a difficult transition for students as they get into college and start looking at the classwork that's necessary for a STEM major or occupation. So compared to non-STEM majors, STEM majors earn higher average grades in the first year, but over time their GPAs tend to decrease. And non-STEM majors tend to hold steady or even increase. So there's a little bit of shift as they go through college. But what did we start to find over time? And it's that calculus appears to be a gatekeeper course in STEM fields. And if you remember back when we talked about the college readiness benchmarks, algebra was that first course, that typical first-year course. But what we're looking at now is that calculus appears to be a gatekeeper course in STEM fields. And even those students who complete that core mathematics curriculum, and we talked about that big gap if they didn't, but even those that did, less than a third have a 50% probability of earning a grade of B or higher in calculus. And then only 37% of those first-year STEM majors, those kids who declare a STEM major, earn a STEM degree or certificate within 6 years. So that is a major implication on what happens with students. And one of the points, taking a core mathematics curriculum, which may be Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry in high school, just may not be enough for them to prepare for a STEM career. So within the studies, they tried to determine typical first-year math and science courses taken by STEM majors, and then they looked to derive a STEM readiness benchmark using those ACT scores and grades of first-year STEM math and science courses, and then to validate the readiness benchmarks as they relate to college outcomes beyond that first year. So what were some of the evidence? Course transcripts from over 172,000 students from 27 public four-year institutions, and a review of course catalogs for STEM programs. So what's some of the data that we found? And remember that we talked about in our college readiness benchmarks that college algebra is that typical first-year course. And in this graph, you can see, in this chart, you can see that college algebra was the preferred choice of the non-STEM students, 31%. But if you look at the students interested in STEM, calculus was the top math choice. And if you look farther to the right, you can see some real differentials there For like students looking at engineering and technology, 38% to calculus versus 5% for algebra. So a huge differential there in the first math class. If we look at the first science class, again, biology is what's associated with our college readiness benchmark, and 35% of students in that non-STEM category, that was the largest group. But in the STEM area, you can see that chemistry, with 54%, stood out for those students interested in STEM. In the course catalog review, which we talked about as part of the work that we've done, we looked at those top 10 colleges and universities that admitted the largest number of ACT tested students who intended on majoring in STEM. 79% indicated calculus as a first-year requirement, and 90% indicated chemistry, biology, physics, or engineering in science as satisfying first-year requirements. So those students looking at STEM, there's a large percentage that have to take calculus that very first year. So in starting to look at validating the STEM readiness benchmarks, we looked at some key points. Those STEM majors who met our STEM benchmarks, they're more likely to earn a GPA over 3, they're more likely to persist in a STEM field through year 4, and they're more likely to complete that STEM bachelor's degree in 4, 5, or 6 years. One of the things that you will have access to, you'll have access to our PowerPoint afterwards, and you can see where this research report is posted for you to access, and it's part of our research studies at ACT. So what is the STEM score? So the STEM score is the rounded average of the ACT mathematics and science scores. Okay, so if we look at what would that STEM score be if it had at least student had at least a 50% chance of earning a B or higher grade in STEM-related math and science courses, which we just looked at, we come up with that STEM benchmark is 26. And again, there's a technical brief that will be available to you that you can access on the PowerPoint. But so if you think back to the college readiness benchmarks in math and science, they were much lower. So we're looking at now saying that a STEM benchmark should be 26, and that is the rounded average of the ACT math and science scores. So what did that do? So that pre-college achievement and established a high level of pre-college academic achievement that is important for success. So we know that students need to take a rigorous curriculum and work to make sure that they align their interests with their potential STEM major or occupation. And then we've also seen data that shows that expressed and measured interest in STEM also helps predict success. So this particular chart is one that's been of high interest to me. So if we look at a potential STEM a benchmark of 26, what impact does it do on persistence? The probability of completing a STEM-related bachelor's degree in either 4, 5, or 6 years. So if they do have that STEM score of 26 or higher, they're approximately 3 times more likely than a score of 22 or below to earn a STEM degree within 4, 5, or 6 years. And if you look at that, it's amazingly consistent. Year 4, 29 to 9, year 5, 44 to 15, and year 6, 49 to 17. So it's amazingly consistent. And moreover, of those students majoring in STEM with a STEM score of between 23 and 25, which is just under, still only have a 33% chance of completing a STEM degree by the end of year 6. So the students getting involved with STEM majors and occupations have a definite challenge if their ACT STEM score is less than 26. And just another reaffirmation of how that impacts. This is the expressed and measured interest, and expressed interest, measured interest only, and no interest. You'll see that those students who have the expressed and measured interest, whether they're less than 22.5 on the ACT in that middle category or have a STEM score or higher, the students with expressed and measured interest have a higher percentage degree completion to get that STEM major within 4, 5, or 6 years. Final chart that we want to look at is we want to talk about how this impacts. So if you look back for math and science, any student with expressed and measured interest, and this chart pertains to that, 58% had met the math readiness benchmark, the regular readiness benchmark, and 54% had met the science readiness benchmark. But when you change it to the STEM benchmark, which is now 26, nationally only 33% of those students with expressed and measured interest met that benchmark. So that drops tremendously. I also want to point out the gender gap here. Females, only 26% of those graduates with an expressed and measured interest met the STEM benchmark, while 41% of the males did. So there's a huge gender gap in those students meeting that STEM benchmark. So to wrap up, I just want to make a note about ACT profile. The information that I've shared with you today focuses on graduates. And if we're really going to make an impact on how students prepare for STEM majors and careers, we've got to get started earlier and let them know how best to align their interests and find out what their interests are and make sure they're taking the correct classwork. And ACT does offer a free tool called ACT Profile that students over age of 13 can start utilizing and take our interest inventory and get some feedback and share it with counselors and parents. And it's a social media tool that is a great asset to students. We do have an upcoming webinar focused on ACT Profile, which it would be outstanding because this is a great tool to use, and again, it's at no cost. It's provided by ACT, and that upcoming webinar will be February 9th at 1:00 p.m. So I just would like to thank you for your participation, and just a reminder that ACT STEM reports, past and future, can be found at this. And we would certainly encourage you to ask questions via the questions panel if you have questions you'd like to get answered. But I'd like to thank you for your participation, and have a great day.